December 22nd, 1944. 11:30 a.m. Bastogne, Belgium. Frost steamed from every breath as Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kinnard watched 4 German officers trudge in across the snow, a white flag sharp against the blasted town. They carried a message wrapped in smug certainty, an ultimatum to surrender, couched as inevitable victory. "The fortune of war is changing," it declared. This time, the U.S. forces in and around Bastogne had been encircled by strong German armor. There was, the note claimed, only one way to spare the trapped Americans from complete destruction: the honorable capitulation of the surrounded town. The envoys waited with effortless confidence, and not without cause. Roughly 18,000 Americans were hemmed in by about 30,000 Germans, with hundreds of tanks. No supplies were getting through. The weather had grounded every Allied aircraft. The nearest relief force lay more than 100 miles away. What the Germans didn't know was that 130 miles to the south, General George S. Patton had just made a promise so bold even Eisenhower thought he was joking, one that meant shifting an entire army across brutal winter roads faster than any force had ever moved. The math of the fight was about to change, not because of greater numbers or shinier weapons, but because German overconfidence was about to collide with American stubbornness and a commander who refused to accept impossible. That turn had begun 6 days earlier, before dawn on December 16, 1944. At exactly 5:30 a.m., the Ardennes erupted with a violence unseen in the West since 1940. Some 1,600 German guns opened along an 80-mile front, shells shrieking through frozen air into unprepared American lines. Private First Class Robert Leckie of the 909th Infantry Division wrote later, "The ground trembled under us. Trees flew into splinters. Even the air screamed. We'd been told the Germans were finished. We'd been told wrong." This was Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, Hitler's last throw to flip the war's momentum. In strict secrecy, the Wehrmacht had assembled 410,000 troops, roughly 1,400 tanks and assault guns, and 2,600 artillery pieces. They moved at night through the dense Eifel woods, radios silent, horse teams hauling supply wagons to muffle engines. Major General Heinz Kokott, commanding the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, noted the moment before H hour. Soldiers standing wordless in the dark, breath puffing as pale clouds. They understood the stakes. This wasn't just another push. It was the last chance. Their target was the softest spot on the Allied line. 4 thinly stretched American divisions over hard terrain, many new to battle or recovering from earlier fights. The Germans achieved total surprise. Within hours, whole U.S. units were overrun or falling back in confusion. But the plan hinged on speed. They had to seize the key road hub at Bastogne inside 48 hours. 7 major roads met there. The arteries German armor needed to reach the true prize, the port of Antwerp, 125 miles away. Without Bastogne, the offensive would seize up. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz, commanding X-7 Panzer Corps, carried the assignment to take Bastogne. His corps was heavy with steel. The elite 2nd Panzer Division with 88 tanks and assault guns, the seasoned Panzerlehr with 57, and the 26th Volksgrenadier with 17,000 infantry. Racing from the other direction for the same crossroads was the 101st Airborne Division, the Screamin' Eagles, pulled out of Reims, France, where they'd been resting after 72 days in Holland. No winter gear, no time. Just grab your weapons and get on the trucks. December 17th, 9 p.m., the mercury had dropped to 14° Mai as the first 101st trucks rolled through the dark toward Bastogne. Private Donald Burgett of the 506th remembered passing endless American columns streaming the other way. Some men had no rifles. Many had lost their helmets. They shouted into the night, "Turn back! Turn back! They'll kill you all!" One soldier, eyes blown wide, grabbed his arm. "There's thousands! Tigers, panthers, everything!" Burgett pushed him off. They weren't turning around. The convoy stretched for miles. 380 trucks hustling the division through the night. The paratroopers didn't know what was ahead. Maps were scarce. Intelligence conflicted. Only one certainty: reach Bastogne before the Germans. On paper, the 101st showed 85 officers and 11,035 enlisted, 11,140 total. 4 infantry regiments, the 501st, 502nd, 506th Parachute Infantry, and the 327th Glider Infantry, 4 artillery battalions, and the necessary support. The 501st's point elements reached Bastogne at 11:30 p.m. on December 18th, beating the main German thrust by mere hours. Team de Sobry, a combat group from the 10th Armored under Major William Desabry, had already thrown a roadblock at Neuville, 3 miles north. At first light on December 19th, they made contact with German spearheads. Sergeant William McCloskey, a tank commander with Team D, remembered the start. Fog so thick you couldn't see 50 yards. Then the low growl of German armor. The first Panther pushed out of the mist like a beast. Our 75mm rounds pinged off its face like toys. We had to let them close, too close to slip shots into the sides. The fight for Neuville burned all day. With just 15 Shermans, Team de Sobry faced the entire 2nd Panzer Division. They held for 48 hours, killing 31 tanks before the order to pull back. Major de Sobry was badly wounded when a shell smashed his command post, but that stand bought crucial time. December 20th brought a new face to Bastogne. Brigadier General Anthony C. McAuliffe arrived to act for the absent Maxwell Taylor. An artilleryman by trade, cool under pressure, he would need every bit of it. The map in his basement headquarters painted a grim picture. German units were closing from 3 sides. The 26th Volksgrenadier seeped in from south and east. Panzer Lehr pressed from the east. Elements of 2nd Panzer menaced from the north. By noon on December 20th, the last road out, the highway to Neufchâteau, was cut. Captain Richard Winters of Easy Company 506th PIR put his men into foxholes around the ring. We could hear tanks moving in the dark beyond the trees. Men dug deeper by helmet and by hand when entrenching tools snapped in the iron ground. The temperature hovered near zero. Feet were already going black with frostbite. Inside town, 3,000 civilians huddled in cellars while German guns methodically pounded Bastogne. Renée Lemaire, a 30-year-old Belgian nurse, worked herself to exhaustion in an aid station on Rue Neufchâteau, treating American and German wounded alike. She would not survive the siege. The defenders now totaled roughly $18,000. The 101st, with its 11,000 AM-40, Combat Command B of the 10th Armored under Colonel William Roberts, with around 40 running tanks and 800 men. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion with M18 Hellcats. The all-black 969th Field Artillery and other supporting units. December 21st dawned with visibility under 100 yards. Snow and fog braided into a white curtain that made movement a misery. The U.S. Army Weather Report called conditions extremely adverse for any operation. For the Germans, this was a gift Oberstleutnant von Laukert, leading parts of 2nd Panzer, noted, "The weather fights for us. Without their planes, the Americans are only men like us, and we have more tanks." But the storm cut both ways. German armor bogged in the churn made by freeze-thaw cycles. Fuel burn doubled as columns clawed through the muck. Supply trucks jackknifed on glare ice. Wounded men died of cold before a medic could reach them. Inside Bastogne, ammunition dipped dangerously low. Artillery was rationed to 10 rounds per gun per day. After the capture of a medical company on December 19th, supplies were nearly gone. Morphine was reserved for the worst cases. Food fell to 1 meal a day. PFC James Sims later said, "We melted snow to drink. The guy in the hole next to me had his feet frozen to his boots. When the medic cut them off, his toes came with them. He didn't cry, he was past feeling." Meanwhile, 130 miles south in Verdun on December 19th, a very different scene. In a cold barracks warmed by a single pot-bellied stove, Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower gathered his top brass. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, and Lieutenant General George S. Patton. Intelligence Chief Major General Kenneth Strong had just finished laying out the German breakthrough. Silence pressed down. Eisenhower broke it with the tone that set the American response. "We will treat this situation as our opportunity, not as a disaster. There will be only cheerful faces at this table." Patton grinned. "Hell, let those bastards drive all the way to Paris, then we'll cut them off and chew them up." Eisenhower leaned forward. "George, I need you to attack north. How fast can you pivot toward Bastogne?" Patton's answer stunned the room. "I can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours. Laughter and disbelief rippled. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder scoffed, swinging a corps 90 degrees across 100 miles of frozen roads in 2 days? Impossible. Eisenhower reddened. "Don't be fatuous, George. Try that, and you'll go in piecemeal and get destroyed." But Patton wasn't bragging. For 3 days, his brilliant G3, Colonel Oscar Koch, had warned him about the German buildup in the Ardennes. Patton already had 3 contingency plans in his desk. He had pre-positioned fuel, ammo, and medical units along potential northern routes. "I'm not being fatuous, Ike," Patton said evenly. "I've issued preliminary orders. My staff has 3 axes ready. Just give the word." He spread a map. "I'll use Milliken's 3 Corps, 4th Armored 1st, then the 26th and 80th Infantry. We'll go up from Ardennes and punch through to Bastogne." Eisenhower studied the distances, the weather, the glass-slick roads, but Bastogne had to be relieved. "When do you start?" "Morning of the 22nd. "Do it." As Patton left, he phoned headquarters with the prearranged code. "Play ball." Those 2 words set a once-in-a-war maneuver in motion. Within hours, 133,000 vehicles rolled north. The entire Third Army, 250,000 men, had to swing on its heel. Supply dumps planned for an offensive into Germany had to be pulled and replanted. 20,000 miles of field telephone had to be restrung. Artillery grids calculated for one direction had to be redone for another. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams of the 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, got his orders at 7 p.m. on December 19th to move 150 miles in 19 hours through a blizzard. "We drove by a blackout the whole night," he recalled. Tank commander stood half out of the turrets, freezing, guiding drivers who couldn't see the verge. Men slept on their feet and had to be shaken awake. The logistics were brutal. Each Sherman would guzzle roughly 175 gallons just to reach the line. The division needed 50,000 gallons to get there. Fuel trucks ran nonstop, many sliding off into ditches. When engines died, gas was hand-carried in 5-gallon jerry cans. Master Sergeant Frank Caruso of 4th Armored Maintenance worked 72 hours straight. We swapped track blocks while tanks were still crawling to their start points. Hands froze to steel, skin ripped when you pulled away. Nobody stopped. We knew those paratroopers in Bastogne were counting on us. Back at the perimeter, the ring had shrunk to under 16 miles. German guns had the strong points dialed in. Aid stations overflowed. At 11:30 a.m. on December 22, 4 German officers under a white flag reached the lines of F Company 327th Glider Infantry. The party included Major Wagner of Exl-4th Panzer Corps, Lieutenant Helmut Henke from the Panzer Operations Staff, and 2 enlisted men of the 901st Panzer Grenadier Regiment. Wagner carried a typed ultimatum in 2 copies, German and English. The English page had been banged out on an English typewriter, German umlauts penciled in by hand. Sent upstairs, the message reached General McAuliffe, catching a quick nap in a Belgian barracks basement. When Lieutenant Colonel Ned Moore woke him, "The Germans have sent people to accept our surrender," McAuliffe's first words were, "Nuts." Staff gathered as he read the German demand, grim talk of a hopeless American position and artillery ready to annihilate U.S. troops. Surrender, they said, would spare unnecessary bloodshed. "What do we answer?" Colonel Moore asked. McAuliffe shrugged. "Well, I don't know." Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kinnard spoke up. "What you said first is hard to beat, sir." McAuliffe chuckled. "You mean nuts?" Heads nodded. He wrote the reply destined for legend. To the German commander, nuts, the American commander. When Colonel Joseph Harper delivered it, the Germans blinked. "Nuts? What does that mean?" Harper grinned. "It means go to hell. And if you attack again, we'll kill every last German that tries to break into this town." Major Wagner stiffened. "We will kill many Americans. This is war." "On your way, Bud," Harper said, "and good luck." General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding 5th Panzer Army, later admitted he hadn't authorized the demand and wasn't surprised by the refusal. Panzerlehr had sent the Parlementaire on its own. The answer brought an immediate reply from the Luftwaffe. That evening, the first heavy bombing of Bastogne fell. In the foxholes, men tasted a glimpse of hell. Corporal Walter Gordon of Easy Company said, "The ground bucked like an earthquake. Trees went up like torches. Shrapnel buzzed like hornets. We pressed ourselves into the ice and prayed." The temperature slid to near 10 degrees. On the line, men slept in shifts, so no one froze to death. They learned to use empty ration cans rather than leave the hole. A few exposed minutes could mean a sniper's bullet or a case of frostbite. Food was down to 1 K ration a day, about 2,800 calories, when the cold demanded 4,000. Troops saved the waxed cardboard from the boxes. It burned long enough to melt a canteen of snow. Technical Sergeant Donald Malarkey found another answer. The dead German horses, hundreds of them, were frozen solid fresh meat. We hacked chunks off with bayonets and cooked them over fires made from busted ammo crates. It tasted awful, but it kept us alive. December 24th brought hope and horror in the same breath. Clearing skies raised the chance of air resupply, but also gave the Luftwaffe a window for its worst raid. At 8:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve, German bombers came. One bomb scored a direct hit on René Lemaire's aid station. The building collapsed, burying dozens of wounded and staff. Corporal Kenneth Moore was outside when it struck. I ran toward where the aid station should have been, only a heap of stone. We heard voices under there crying for help, calling for their mothers. We dug with bare hands all night, pulling out bodies. Miss Lemaire was gone. She'd stayed with those who couldn't be moved. 30 American wounded died in that blast, along with the Belgian nurse who had become a symbol of mercy. Augusta Chiwe, a Congolese-Belgian nurse, survived and worked straight for 30 hours after the bombing. As Christmas turned, Patton's army still fought the blizzard. The offensive he'd launched on the 22nd was behind schedule. 4th Armored had advanced only 7 miles in 3 days. Patton, never bound by the book, summoned his chaplain, Colonel James O'Neill, on December 23rd. "Chaplain, publish a prayer for good weather. I'm tired of these men fighting mud and floods as well as Germans. See if you can't get God on our side." O'Neill hesitated. "Sir, that'll take a thick rug." "I don't care if it takes a flying carpet," Patton said. "Get me a prayer for good weather." They printed 250,000 cards and handed one to every soldier in 3rd Army. "Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech Thee, grant us fair weather for battle." Whether by providence or pure weather luck, December 23rd rose crystal clear. After 7 days of impenetrable murk, visibility stretched to 10 miles. The temperature climbed above freezing for the first time in a week. More important, Allied aircraft could finally fly. At 9:50 a.m., the first Pathfinders marked drop zones with colored smoke. By 11:50, the sky filled with C-47s, 241 of them tight in formation. Sergeant Jack Agnew of the Pathfinders remembered, "We popped purple smoke. Then we heard it, low at first, then a roar. The sky went dark with planes. Prettiest sight I ever saw. Bastogne erupted. Men climbed from holes, waving helmets, many in tears. For 7 days they'd been alone. Now help fell from the sky. At 11:55 a.m., the first shoots blossomed. Ammunition, medical kits, rations, blankets, and most precious of all, artillery shells, rained down. Of 1,446 bundles, 95% were recovered. Captain James Parker of the 101st G4 coordinated the scramble. Men ran through shell fire to dragging bundles. I saw a private catch a shard of steel, stand up, and haul his chute to cover, blood all over his face. German flak joined the battle. Guns around the town fired hard. The C-47s had to fly straight and level at 1,000 feet for accuracy. Easy targets. By December 26th, aircraft had delivered about 1,020.7 tons by parachute and 92.4 by glider. The biggest single lift came on the 26th, 289 planes flying the Bastogne run. At 2:45 a.m. on Christmas morning, German artillery answered with the heaviest barrage yet. For 2 hours, shells lashed the perimeter. At 5:30 a.m., 18 Panzer IVs of the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division with infantry in white smocks slammed into the western flank. Lieutenant Colonel Wolfgang Mauld led the thrust with orders from Cocotte. Bastogne must fall today. It is the Führer's Christmas wish. German tanks punched through the first foxholes of Company A, 327th Glider Infantry. PFC Kenneth Hendricks held the second line. The ground shook with engines. In the gray light, they looked like monsters. Our bazookas bounced off, but our tank destroyers were set perfectly. The 705th's M18 Hellcats hid among ruins. As the panzers clanked past, the TDs shot them in the flanks. Sergeant Bill Harper commanded one. We let them roll by, then smacked them in the tail where the armor's thin. My gunner, Johnson, was on fire. 5 rounds, 3 kills. By 10 OKM, all 18 German tanks burned. Nearly 400 German infantry lay dead in the snow. A captured officer told his interrogators, "Your defense was magnificent." After this morning, we knew we could not take Bastogne. McAuliffe issued a Christmas message, retelling the surrender demand and his one-word reply, adding, "We have stopped cold everything thrown at us from the north, east, south, and west." December 26th, 4 p.m., Lieutenant Charles Boggess, commanding Sherman Cobra King of the 37th Tank Battalion, peered through his periscope at the Belgian village of Ardennes, 4 miles from Bastogne. For 4 days, 4th Armored had fought yard by yard. At 2:20 p.m., Lieutenant Colonel Abrams ordered the battalion forward and called for every gun in range. "I want everything you've got," he radioed. Within minutes, 340 shells poured into German positions around Ardennes. Boggess remembered Germans sprinting from holes as the wall of fire walked across their lines. When the barrage lifted, Abrams said, "Move out." The tanks surged in, guns blazing. Private James Hendricks, bow gunner in Cobra King, described it. "We ran through that place like a hot knife through butter. Fire from windows, doorways, everywhere. Our 75 swung left and right, blasting point blank into houses. At 4:50 p.m., Cobra King crested a rise and Boggess saw U.S. uniforms ahead. Engineers of the 326th Airborne, Bastogne's outer ring. "Come on in," they yelled. "You're the first tanks we've seen in 10 days. Boggess radioed Abrams, "Contact with friendly forces." The siege was over, but at a price. The 37th Tank Battalion lost 5 killed, 22 wounded, 5 missing in the dash. The 53rd Armored Infantry lost 30 killed and 180 wounded. The corridor was narrow, only about 400 yards, but it was open. Word exploded across Bastogne. Men who had counted every cartridge fired full clips into the air. Wounded cheered from stretchers. McAuliffe, calm as ever, said simply, "We're glad to see you boys." For the Germans, the blow was psychological. Major General Kokot wrote in his diary, "The relief of Bastogne is a disaster tactically and morally. Our men no longer believe in victory. They have seen American resolve, and it has broken their spirit." An officer of Panzer Lehr put it more brutally, "We threw everything at Bastogne, our best troops, the last tanks, the last shells. They held. When we demanded surrender, they laughed. Nuts." That one word hurt us more than 1,000 bombs. The defenders had started around 18,000 strong. From December 19th to January 6th, the 101st suffered 341 killed, 1,691 wounded, 516 missing. CCB, a 10th Armored, took about 500 casualties. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion claimed 108 German armored vehicles destroyed for the loss of 17 Hellcats. German losses around Bastogne were ruinous. The 26th Volksgrenadier lost over 60%, Panzer Lehr lost 42 tanks, and 2nd Panzer, which had bypassed the town toward the Meuse, ran out of fuel 4 miles short and was mauled by the U.S. 2nd Armored Division. December 27th brought clearer skies and the full weight of Allied air power. Between the 23rd and 27th, Allied airmen flew more than 34,000 sorties. The Luftwaffe, which began the push with roughly 2,000 aircraft, was down to fewer than 300 flyable within a week. RAF ace Pierre Klosterman, flying a Tempest, called it tank plinking. With no German cover, they dove from 8,000 feet, loosed rockets at 2,000, and pulled up, lines of German vehicles burning below. The worst blow came on December 26, when 200 9.4 Lancasters dropped 1,140 tons near St. Vith. Every road for nearly 2 miles became impassable. Unteroffizier Hans Behrens of the 18th Volksgrenadier survived. The earth erupted, buildings vanished, men simply disappeared. McAuliffe later singled out Tassade Tactical Air Command. Without your splendid cooperation, we could never have held. Something else had been happening inside the German ranks, something Allied intelligence wouldn't fully appreciate until after the war. German soldiers went in fed on propaganda about soft, pampered Americans who would run at the first hard blow. Bastogne shattered that myth. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann of the 26th Volksgrenadier wrote his wife on December 24th. The letter was found on his body. The Americans are not as told. They fight like devils. Yesterday, one machine gun crew held our company for 3 hours. Major Jan Krah of Panzer Lehr was captured on December 27th. His interrogation was plain. You did not win by numbers or weapons, but by spirit. At Bastogne, we learned American soldiers are warriors. While the town's defense made headlines, Patton's relief was its own revolution in operational art. The numbers still stagger. In 72 hours, Third Army shifted 250,000 men more than 100 miles on ice, repositioned 133,000 vehicles without a major jam, strung 20,000 miles of wire, opened 70 ammunition points, built 40 fuel dumps with 500,000 gallons, set 20 field hospitals, hauled 4,000 tons of shells, issued 62,000 maps. Colonel Oscar Koch, Patton's G2, wrote later, "What Patton did in 3 days should have been impossible. We'd estimated 6 days just to plan it." The secret was prep. For 2 weeks, while others waved off the chance of a German attack, Patton had wargamed exactly this turn and ordered detailed contingencies. The medical story deserves its own salute. Even after most supplies and personnel were captured on the 19th, doctors and medics still saved lives at astonishing rates. Major René Beaumont, chief surgeon of the 101st, performed 167 operations in 10 days, often with scant anesthesia. We used candles when the generators failed. We used Belgian cognac when morphine ran out. Technician 5th grade Eugene Rowe of Easy Company treated over 200 wounded during the siege, often crawling through shell bursts to reach them, never carrying a weapon, only bandages and morphine syrettes. Bastogne's stand and Patton's turn north had consequences far beyond a local success. Hitler's grand attempt to split the Allied armies and retake Antwerp froze in its tracks. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt admitted in post-war questioning, "Bastogne was the grave of the Ardennes offensive. We needed that road junction by the 18th. When the Americans held for a week and were relieved, we knew the attack had failed." Germany had thrown its last strategic reserve, about 25 divisions, into the fight. In 6 weeks, they suffered between 81,000 and 98,000 casualties, lost over 600 tanks and assault guns, and about 1,000 aircraft, losses that could not be replaced. American losses were heavy too, roughly 75,000 killed, wounded, or missing, with 19,000 dead. But America could make good the numbers. By January 1945, fresh divisions were arriving from the States at 1 per week. More critically, the offensive burned out Germany's last reserves. When the Soviets launched their winter push on January 12, 1945, there were no strategic reserves left to send east. The road to Berlin stood open. Bastogne minted legends that still endure. McAuliffe's "nuts" became a byword for defiance. Patton's march is still a case study in staff colleges around the world. In December 1984, veterans from both sides returned for the 40th anniversary. Former enemies met as friends. McAuliffe, then 87, gave the keynote. "We fought here not for conquest, but for freedom, not out of hatred, but duty. And when it ended, we helped rebuild what war had broken." Former Hauptmann Hans Detmer of the 26th Volksgrenadiers said, "I came as a conqueror in 1944. I return as a friend. The Americans we fought showed us what democracy means, not weakness, but strength." Today, the Martyrs' Memorial rises over the town, a star-shaped monument honoring the 76,190 Americans lost in the Battle of the Bulge. Each December 16th at 5:30 a.m., the moment the offensive began, bells ring across Bastogne. In the square sits the Sherman Barracuda from the 11th Armored. Children climb over the same steel that freed their grandparents. Paratrooper Vincent Speranza, who once brought beer to the wounded, returned often. The town brewery created Airborne beer in his honor. On his last visit in 2019 at age 96, he raised a glass. To the boys who didn't come home, to the people who never forgot, to freedom. The final tallies still astonish. U.S. forces in Bastogne, roughly 18,000 at the start, including 11,240 from the 101st. CCB 10th Armored with about 40 operational tanks. Total American casualties at Bastogne, near 4,500. German forces committed there, 25,000 to 30,000 initially, swelling to around 55,000. German losses, 15,000 plus over 100 tanks knocked out. Patton's relief, 250,000 men pivoted north, 133,000 vehicles moved, more than 100 miles advanced in winter, breakthrough in 5 days. Air supply, about 100 or 200 tons delivered, 961 C-47 sorties, 241 aircraft on December 23rd alone. Roughly 95% of drops recovered. Weather, 168 straight hours below freezing. Lows near 10 degrees dust. Visibility, December 19, 22, under 100 yards, clear skies from the 23rd. In January 1945, Winston Churchill told Parliament, "This is undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war, and will, I believe, be regarded as an ever-famous American victory." Field Marshal Montgomery conceded, "The Americans at Bastogne wrote one of the finest chapters in military history. Their stand will be remembered as long as men honor courage." Perhaps the most fitting tribute came from General von Lüttwitz himself, whose corps had ringed the town. Visiting the memorial in 1954, he saluted. They were magnificent enemies who became better friends. They fought not for conquest, but for principle. That is why they deserved to win. The Germans who had mocked the trapped Americans learned something hard in those frozen days. They learned that free men fighting for one another are stronger than any army fighting for plunder that will outlast arithmetic. That when democracy is shoved to the edge, it shoves back with a force tyranny cannot match. The relief of Bastogne proves that when freedom is truly in danger, champions appear. In December 1944, those champions wore the Screamin' Eagle of the 101st and the red-blue triangle of Patton's Third Army. They were teenagers from Iowa farms and New York tenements, Texas ranches and California shops. They were America. On a quiet hill outside town, a foxhole remains as it was in December 1944. A small plaque carries a line spoken by a young paratrooper whose name is lost but whose spirit isn't. They've got us surrounded, the poor bastards. That magnificent cheek, that refusal to bow even when defeat seemed certain, that was the spirit of Bastogne. It held the line against tyranny. It brought Patton's tanks roaring through the snow. And when the moment came, when freedom itself hung by a thread, the answer rang out in a single word, heard round the world: nuts. The sneer froze and died in the snow around Bastogne, buried beneath the thunder of Patton's guns and the unbreakable will of paratroopers who would not quit. In its place came respect, then admiration, and finally, friendship. The fortress of democracy held, the arsenal of freedom prevailed, and in that victory, the course of the free world was set.